of a sort of a meditative reflection, scriptural wise, in terms of setting the tone for us. What's the scriptural theological basis for looking at interculturality? These next sessions now are going to be getting some more input and things like that, but also opening ourselves up on a personal level as well. So this session here, basic understanding of interculturality, and then entering someone else's garden. That's an image that those of you who have had me as a teacher, you've heard me talk about this before, but maybe to listen to it in a little new way in terms of the interculturality. I'm starting here just to sort of show you, there's been a lot of writing in the last 4 or 5 years around interculturality. And the first is there's this 2-volume work that came out basically by the SVDs. It was by Lazar Stanislaus and by Martin Ufing. And this is a 2-volume work that was published both in Germany and in India. And this is a book that is a 2-volume work. At one point, I ordered 100 copies of this, and I distributed it with a bunch of 21 religious orders that were doing programs at CTU, a 3-year program on interculturality. So this has been quite a significant. It's not only SVD and SSPS author others, but this has been sort of a primary text. There's 2 volumes of this. One is Intercultural Living, ad intra. The other one, Intercultural Mission, ad extra, and our work that we do. Drawing from these 2 volumes, our Editorial Verbo Divino in Spain, they chose certain articles from that 2-volume set, and they then published it. It's on your screen here too. You can see it there. I'm holding the book, but you can see the screen better. Interculturalidad en la vida en la misión. And they took certain chapters from here, they translated into Spanish, and of course distributed it from there. And I want to thank Joe Scott for his help in that distribution of those books through Editorial Verbo Divino. I really appreciate that. Then Orbis Books here in the US, they did something else. This is the book in the lower left-hand corner. They took some of these from the 2-volume set, and they then published it English chapters out of that same volume. So in other words, the work that we initially did has been translated into Spanish. Then Orbis Books put it out a smaller book with just some of the chosen articles in here. And again, many by SVD, SSBS, but also by others as well. So that work is multiplying itself. And then the other book that I will be referring to is by Anthony Gittins, Tony Gittins, who many of you would maybe have heard of. Those who were at CTU would know him. He used to be at CTU, anthropologist. He's a Spiritan priest, worked in Sierra Leone. And he has this book called Living Mission Interculturally. And this is, I think, a very good book. I tried with him to get it published into Spanish, but we weren't able to accomplish that. But I think it's a work that is also very helpful. And I'm not selling books here. I just want you to know, though, that there's been a lot of reflections, and there's several other projects that are currently happening now in terms of publication too, as we keep expanding into new areas that this is related to. Okay. So just some basic things here, and I know that this is probably old hat for us, but just to get us a basic understanding, what is culture? So we, before at the 19th century, first part of the 20th century, there was a classicist understanding of culture. Some refer to this as the pre-modern perspective. In this case, one culture was normative, that culture was the West. It was seen as the norm, the universal. The West is the best, and we know this through colonial times. This picture painting that I have here is a picture representing colonialism in the US context. Here they had a woman depicting progress. Behind her, the skies are bright, and you have the stagecoaches, and you have the farmers and the settlers. And on the other side of the picture, you have darkness. You have the Native Americans running for their lives, and the buffalo being slaughtered, and all of that. This was an image of, and this is, I know there are good people in this thing, but this is colonialism, and it occurred here in the US as well as, of course, around the world. And many of you come from countries that were at the bottom end of all this colonialism. And today, of course, is the post-colonialism. So moving from that classicist view to a more empiricist perspective, which says that every culture has a legitimate way of life. Every people has a culture. No culture is normative or universal or permanent. no culture is better than another. And this is the understanding of culture as we move into the modern period. The modern period of understanding culture, moving into the second half of the 20th century, anthropologists helped us a lot in this way. And of course, through our anthropos tradition is SVDs, that was also helpful. Three key words that I'd use when I talk about the importance of culture are meaning, identity, and order. Culture gives us the meaning we need, identity of who we are, and order versus chaos in life. These are like three key words for why we need culture in some ways. The modern understanding of culture saw culture as a uniform, that there was people belonged to a culture. It was uniform, rather static. In other words, it was, once it was there, clear boundaries. And the stress in this was more on the order that culture brings. This modern understanding is what I brought with me in Papua New Guinea in the mid-70s when I went there for the first time. This was the understanding I had when I would go to the various, and as you know, in Papua New Guinea, great cultural diversity. So I worked in areas where there was, there's 720 different languages in Papua New Guinea. So in my pastoral work, I used the trade language, but also there were the local languages. And I sort of saw culture as being rather static, that you had a group of people and it was sort of set in stone. Everybody understood exactly what, and they agreed to it. One way of thinking about this is that these are pictures of jigsaw puzzles. So the modern way of understanding culture is that all the pieces fit together. Huh? They all fit together, and we all know, and these are two images of jigsaw puzzles, that if you try to cut out a piece from one jigsaw puzzle or take one piece and try to fit into another, it's not going to fit. So for us, as we move from one culture to another, we try to use, the tendency is to take the pieces from our culture, whether it's about marriage, gender roles, economics, family, reconciliation. We take those pieces from our puzzle and we try to fit them in to see how they fit. The challenge is to learn a new puzzle and not to try to fit our pieces into it. Huh? Okay. Now, the disadvantage of this image, which I realized recently, more over the years, is that the problem with this is that it's static. You take a jigsaw puzzle, it's got hard edges, it doesn't move, the pieces don't change, and things like that. Huh? And it focuses on the point that everything fits together nicely. But we know in culture that's not the case. So now we move to what we consider now what's called the postmodern understanding of culture. In other words, that culture is a unity, but there's diversity within that culture, and that culture is changing. It's not something out of a box that with nice sharp edges and everything fits together perfectly. Things don't fit together perfectly, and it's fluid. And here the stress is more on the chaos, that it's a lot of changes that are occurring. And I realize this in Papua New Guinea, even the village life, the cultures there, they are changing. And they were changing for thousands of years. They were exchanging stories and rituals and economics and language between people with different languages, but still they were changing. When I went back to Papua New Guinea years later, let's see, the last time was 2002, which is over 25 years after the first time. I saw things obviously had changed a lot in the villages. Huh? So this idea is that the postmodern focuses more on the chaos. What I would like to do is to put together both. Culture provides order, but there's also chaos within culture. Okay, chaos doesn't mean totally bad. It just means there's things don't fit together perfectly. So what are some of those elements? And this is what I mentioned earlier this morning, that Steve Bevins in his work, he uses the term context to talk about this. For me, I would see context equal to the postmodern understanding of culture. However, the one problem is that when I use the word culture, people often think only of ethnicity and race. And this is, I've many people I talk to, when I say culture, that's what they think of. That's only that. But the postmodern understanding of culture and culture within interculturality and context is much more than that. So certainly there's ethnicity and race included. However, postmodern understanding of culture also includes social location, rich and poor. They look at the world very differently. I've seen images from Bariloche in southern Argentina. Joe Scott, you worked there in Argentina. And Bariloche, and you see one side of the street, total poverty, and the other side, the rich people, huh? Unfortunately, this is around the world. Makes a big difference. How rich people and poor people experience culture is very different. Those pieces don't fit together always so nicely. Male and female, how women and men experience culture very differently. Huh? Generations, how they understand culture differently. I'm the oldest of 11 children. My youngest brother is 22 years younger than me. He has had a very different experience of growing up and his sense of culture in the same family. He could be my son, of course. Huh? How generations. So these are various factors. Then we get into social change. And again, this leads to great ongoing, and it's very, society, culture is very fluid. So in other words, fluid culture isn't something so, not static. So when we think of interculturality, we can't say, oh, somebody's from this country, so they must be like this. No, we know that's true anyways. Huh? And there's big changes. Of course, social media has changed our world so much over time. I was in Papua New Guinea for 6 years and never made one phone call. Nowadays, look at me like, how could you not make a phone call? Well, there were not good phones. There was no phones. Very different from our younger SVDs, and that's the way our world is changing. Of course, COVID-19 is changing our world. And that's also, it's fluid. And then we have particular individual and communal situations in the same, that also impacts our understanding of context, postmodern understanding. My youngest brother and I have different perspectives, even though we have the same biological parents. So when we start talking about interculturality, we need to think of it in a broader sense, not just ethnicity, so much broader than that. Another image that's used for talking about culture you're familiar with is that of the iceberg. So an iceberg is 85% below the water level. So when we're talking about culture, on the top, you have those things that we see or taste. We taste the food, we can read the literature, we can see the dress, we can hear and learn the language, we can practice, we can celebrate the holidays. Those are all things above the surface level. And when we engage others, whether they're SVDs or whoever, or in our ministry, we need to start here. We need to learn the language. We need to be attentive to food habits and dress and things like that. But the challenge is 85% is below the water level. And this is where the real meaning of culture comes in. This is a challenge for us. How do we get to understand that? Because what's under here, the biases, values, interpretations, the goals, all of that, we need to understand this in order to understand what's above the water level. Huh? So how do we understand that? And that's the big challenge. And I think all of us probably have experienced people who think they know us because they know the surface level, but they don't know what's underneath. So that's what we talk about in terms of interculturality. It's two icebergs bumping together, but of course, we're many more than just two. So how do we begin to understand and be enriched by and also challenged by two different cultures? And that is usually below the water level. It's true, there can be challenges in terms of food. The first time I had balut in the Philippines during martial law back in the 70s. I assume people know what balut is, huh? Anyways, first time I had balut, I took a little bit of adjusting. Okay, so there are some things we got to adjust to on the surface level, but of course, then how to understand below the level. And that's the challenge of interculturality, going beyond the surface level. Now, in terms of definition of terms, and I feel I just need to do this so that we're all on the same page, because sometimes terms are used differently. I'm drawing very much on Tony Gitten's work here in his first couple, this is from chapter 2. Again, if people want to read more, Tony's book is a very helpful work if people want to learn more about this. I use it on the international level as well. It's not a US focus. It's very helpful on the international level. Monocultural. Monocultural is where a culture is primarily homogeneous. Now there are fewer and fewer homogeneous cultures today, but there still are some cultures that have 95% of people who were of one ethnicity, if we use it in that way, or of one group, but there's still diversity there. The tendency there is ethnocentrism. In other words, ethnocentrism, where we take our culture and use it to value and to judge others. This is natural. Culture teaches us, be with your own kind. Be with your own kind. Interculturality is countercultural. We as SVDs, we are saying, I'm not staying with my own kind. So we need to be beyond it. The goal of this is primarily to avoid contact with others. Now, this is an extreme. In a way, I could say that my parents grew up in a monocultural living, or I grew up 95% German American Catholics in my county, in a rural area. However, it doesn't mean my parents didn't have openness towards some other people. However, that's one sort of group of folks. Sometimes our SVDs say our culture is very monocultural. I would sort of question that today, but I won't name those countries by name, but sometimes this question comes up there. The next terms are international or multicultural living. This is the mere presence of different nations and cultures in the same physical space. You go to an airport, you have people of different cultures and of different countries. If it's a bigger airport, they're in the same space. Does it mean they're talking to each other? Does it mean that they're getting to know each other or even like each other? But they are together. And some people say the SVDs are an international. By fact, we are. By fact, we were at the beginning of the SVDs. We were international by fact of different nations. The goal here is to try to eliminate difference, tolerate it, manage the difference. The goal, managing that difference. Therefore, when in an airport, they say, no matter what culture you're from, what nation you're from, what that is, this is where you stand in line. This is where you get your tickets. This is the immigration lines. We need to have tolerance. And tolerance is a good thing in those situations. We got to have it, or else it'd be chaos. What do we do in airports? Now, if you go to airports in other countries, you're going to see that their rules are a little different, right? But wherever you're at, tolerance is sometimes, we need that in certain parts of the world. We only wish we would have that. But for SVDs, we got to go beyond tolerance. If we're living in a community and all we are doing is tolerating one another, that's not far enough. Jesus didn't say just tolerate one another. Then the next term is cross-cultural. The way I and others are using and understanding this term of cross-cultural is that we have a commitment to move outside of our own context. We want to learn another culture, another language. This is what we do as SVDs. This means we need to adapt. On the surface level, certainly, maybe below it too. Acculturation, identifying, or socialization, identifying with another culture. But we always remain an outsider. I never become a Papua New Guinean or a Vietnamese. The goal here is assimilation or accommodation. This is a good thing. This is a good thing for missionaries to do, for religious to do. However, it's one directional. That's how I'm defining the term, and others define the term. Cross-cultural is moving from one place to another. It's a good thing to do. But intercultural is saying we got to go further. Intercultural is an intentional engagement of difference for the sake of understanding and enrichment. So we are engaging the difference in order to understand and to be enriched by the other. That means there's tolerance for ambiguity. There is ambiguity when you bring those icebergs together, but there's a commitment to mutual dialogue. And that word mutuality is very, 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 very important. Not just crossing over from one side to another, but really that we are going to be mutually enriched. This is the big, big difference Interculturality is about the quality of the relationship, not the quantity. It's the quality of that mutual enrichment on a personal, group, social basis. An aim to create balanced relationships. We want to go against post-colonialism and globalization and ethnocentrism. We need to acknowledge our prejudices. We all have them. The goal here is interculturality, which I would equate with an aspect of the reign of God. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were reflecting on the image of the banquet in our Sunday readings. The banquet, that people of all nations can come together. To me, this is what we're talking about in terms of interculturality. We as brothers and sisters, all peoples coming together to be mutually enriched. Why? For the sake of who God is calling us to be. Business people also are talking about interculturality these days. They have to, because they're doing business in China and Japan. My brothers are going to Japan, China, Europe. For business, they're also talking about interculturality, but their goal is for the sake of financial gain or success, which is not a bad thing. However, for us, our goal is for the sake of we are part of God's mission. I have an image of another book here. This just came out in May. I was co-editor of this. Again, we have new articles on this interculturality. And it's interesting that 5 of the 16 chapters are written by SSVS and SPDs. You have Tony Perney in here as well, writing. Other communities are very interested in this. So as we come to this sort of a summary sheet page here, monocultural, homogeneous, a very strong tendency, ethnocentric, international multicultural, just a mere presence of culture, cross-cultural, moving in one direction, intercultural, mutual enriching and challenging relationships in both directions. Ethnocentrism is when we use our culture as a norm for interpreting and judging others. The image I have here on the screen are 2 sets of glasses. You want to imagine the top screen as sort of our what we're born with in terms of what glasses do we use when we see the world in that way, and it's natural. That's what we're born with. We're born. This is the language I use. My stick with your own kind. That's a natural part of culture. It's the way cultures protect and provide meaning, identity, and order. But with interculturality, we are striving to put on God's eyeglasses. How does God see the world? Does God see? Just this week I was talking to some sisters in the Philippines, and they are working with blind girls in their schools. God sees those blind girls as just as loving children of his as anybody else. But often the society around them looks at them differently. So that's the challenge of the interculturality. That's our motivation. How do we see this? And again, I know this is what we do as SVDs. But what I'm hoping is that we can continue to reflect on this. How can we continue to grow? Interculturality as a religious value. This comes from Bob Casala, as you know, was former Superior General. Now he's back in Japan. He's the current president now at Nanzai. The meaning of interculturality goes beyond mere coexistence to emphasize and make more explicit the essential mutuality of the process of cultural interaction on both the personal and the social level. Mutuality for the sake of God's mission, both within our religious life ad intra and within our ministry ad extra. One of the forms that Tony Gittins uses, he has a number of sketches, and when he talks about intercultural, he talks about it in this way in terms of A, B, C, D are different cultures. So in an intercultural community, let's think of our SVD community, or think of the Western province for now, if we do it that way. You have more than an A, B, C, D in terms of cultural diversity. I don't know how many letters you'd put there. Probably need to double the alphabet, at least. But A, B, C, D, these are people of different cultures. So how are we mutually enriched and challenged? Because my encounter with other people, they challenge me also to see more. How can I be more about what Christ is about? So we are doing that in our communities. However, also what we're doing is that E for us is our common vowed life, our 3 vows, it's our constitutions, it's our commitment to being missionaries. That E also includes the local context. We as SVDs, we say we are grounded in our local context. That is also the E. And that E may not be the local culture for A, B, C, or D. When I was in Rome and studying in Rome, there were 85 people in the SVD community. There were 2 Italians out of 95 people. We spoke Italian in the community. We had mass in Italian. My classes are in Italian. In other words, I need to be grounded in that local culture when I come. So A, B, C, D, we come from our different cultural contexts. We are to be enriched, but then together, how do we shape that E? And our E is being shaped differently in the last 50 years. Partly due to Vatican II, but partly due to the shift in our membership, our shift in our world, what's going on, So again, how do we form a single community, let's say in a Western province? The other way you could look at this would be if you looked at this as a parish. In a parish, you have different cultures and contexts. It could be due to ethnicity, race, primary language, could be young, old generations, men and women, immigrants, what generation of immigrants people are. These are all the variables, but yet in a parish, how do you shape that E? And how is that E enriched by and challenged by the diversity? You all know much more about multicultural parishes than I do, the challenges that are there. But the goal is, how do we together, are we enriched by each other? And then for the sake of the E. Tony Gittins then has a number of different points, which I'm going to just review now. I just selected some of them. There are more. This is taken from his chapter 1 in his book. Intercultural living is radically different from living in an international community. It's beyond that. It describes specifically the ways we live out our faith in this. It's about the quality of the relationship. It's the quality, not the quantity. Number 5, intercultural living is not a problem, but a challenge, an opportunity. Not theirs, but ours. It's easy to say it's their problem. It's impossible in an us-them world, but only in a we world. God only sees the world as we, not us and them. Us and them categories, we do this all the time. And this has to do with sexual orientation, has to do with politics, has to do with theological background. I mean, all these different us and them categories that lead to building walls. Intercultural living is not natural, but it's possible, perhaps supernatural. It's unequivocally faith-based living, not just acquiring new techniques. So it's not just techniques. There are techniques. There are techniques about intercultural living. Number 7, it's not easy, but it's desirable. God desires it and urgently needed, interculturality. If one culture is not to dominate, everyone is called to conversion. We're all called to conversion, not just the new people and not just the host. It needs full commitment and hard work. Goodwill is not enough. We need goodwill, but goodwill is not enough. We know that. We have goodwill. When I was in New Guinea, working there, I had plenty of goodwill, but boy, did I make some mistakes. Historically, religious goodwill alone has sometimes perpetuated injustice. It requires compromise. And when I say compromise, I don't mean compromising Christian values, but sometimes it means we have to compromise in our daily living. What do we do? Or in our parish, how do we manage both Spanish and English? How do we do this and that? In our own communities, what kind of compromise is involved? It requires real dialogue and a clear and common vision. That E is that common vision. Number 11, intercultural living is the future of international religious life. This is a very strong statement from Tony Gittins. Unless international communities become intercultural, they will not survive. It's a very strong statement. Intercultural living is not only for international communities, it constitutes a challenge for everyone in ministry with the other. I work a lot with different religious communities. Some of them are international, many are international like ourselves, but some are more they're more diocesan, or they're more limited to a certain, coming from a certain nation. But even there, they need to encounter the other. This produces a revolution in religious life. I have just a couple images here. This is an image from the SSPSs, the cultural diversity represented there in terms of generation, nationality, age, background, and all of that. This is an SVD class, an SVD group of novices. This here is Franciscus. He's assigned to the Western Province. He's Chinese Indonesian. He just was just ordained a deacon, and he keeps asking me about your retreat that I'm doing now. He keeps asking about it. Huh? He's assigned, I think, to your province. The last thing I'm going to do in this presentation is to use this image of entering someone else's garden. This is something, and many of you have had me as a teacher, so you're familiar with this. And if you are familiar with it, I ask you to be patient and maybe try to just look at it from a little different new eyes in terms of interculturality in that way. So this is an image that, I grew up on a farm myself. My dad never went to high school. He was a farmer, and I was the eldest son. So I was helping to feed the pigs when I was in my second grade. I saw pigs being born in the wintertime. So agriculture that's my background. That's part of my thing. Jesus used three parables, agricultural parables. The sower and the seed, the darnel by the enemy, the weeds being sown overnight when the farmer sleeps, good and evil in those gardens, in every garden, and the good seed growing on its own as the farmer sleeps. The word of God has a power of its own. There were apologists and teachers in the first generations of Christianity, and they struggled with this. Justin Martyr talked about the good seeds of the word of God in every culture. This comes back in Vatican II. Tertullian, in a different context in North Africa, is saying, what are you talking about? Look at how the state is persecuting us. So there are both good seeds and weeds in every garden. So what do we do now when we enter another garden? So the garden is sort of the worldview. It's sort of like where life is lived. You want to understand it sort of in a postmodern culture or one's context. So when we go into another culture, we need to be able to understand our own context. This is a picture of me as a little boy. So this is my context, my gender, my economic class, my generation, my nationality, German American, Catholic, county, my ethnicity and race, social change, my own particular circumstances. What are the seeds and weeds in my own garden? Missionaries at the time of colonialism thought that their garden was only good seed and the garden of others was only weeds. That's called a tabula rasa. If that's what you think, you destroy what you see in order to create the good seed that comes from your garden. God's life in earthen jars. That's the image that we used this morning in our reflection. How do we recognize that? Why are we entering someone else's? This comes from Claude Marie Barbour, who was a mentor of mine. She is a French Presbyterian minister, worked in South Africa during apartheid. She went to prison because she broke the laws of whites living with blacks in those days. She wrote this: when ministry is seen as dialogical, it means that ministers become persons immersed in the world of others like Jesus was in our world. The word became flesh, John's prologue. It is with people, therefore, that the minister begins to ask questions. It is with people that basic values, human values, are endorsed and they're challenged, seeds and weeds. And it is this context that shapes the way of announcing the good news and denouncing the sinful structures. Announcing the good news, the seeds of the word of God, good news of God, of Jesus, and denouncing the seeds, the sinful structures, the weeds. How do we begin to enter someone else's garden? The image I use here is that we take off our shoes. Take off our shoes out of respect because we're entering into the world of the other, where God is already present. And this can be amongst our own confreres, who we see on the screen here today. How do we respectfully see how God is already present in their culture? Of course, in ministry as well. When I go to visit a Vietnamese family in St. Louis, When I come to the door, I see the shoes by the door. I know what I have to do, take off my shoes. So I don't drag my dirt or the dirt of the street into somebody's home. You know, if you go to a mosque as well. I remember Jim Liebner taking me into a mosque when we were together. Yeah. Being a stranger, here we have a picture again of Tony Gittins. If a newcomer honestly presents herself or himself as a stranger, thus showing respect for the host, allowing them to take certain necessary initiatives, this facilitates the interaction. Because if we go in, and I'm not saying we're restrained, I say as a stranger. So if I go into that Vietnamese home, I don't tell them how to arrange the pictures on the wall, or how they set the table, or how they do things. Huh? I take that stance of listening and allowing them to show me into their garden. This facilitates the interaction. Even though the price may be some uncertainty and powerlessness on the part of the stranger. We've all had this experience, walking into a world that's new for us, due to language or culture or political situation, whatever it might be. But only by doing this will missionaries, ministers be able to indicate their openness, integrity, and willingness to engage in relationship. Let's take advantage of being a stranger. It means that we're more open to learn. Again, this can be with our confreres and in ministry. We have to learn how to be a child again. This is especially true in language learning, as we know. Becoming a child and the importance of mentors. When I came back to the States after being out of the country for 10 years in 1990, I became rector, unfortunately, right away when I came back due to the death of John Stossel. And I had to have mentors help me to understand these Vietnamese candidates that were seminarians, because I never lived with Vietnamese before. So I had to find Vietnamese who could be mentors for me so I could talk to them and say, help me to understand the Vietnamese culture. And what's the difference between culture and personality? And what is this all about? Because I was making judgments based on my own garden. I can give you plenty of examples. I'm sure we all know what that's like. We make judgments from our behavior. We make mistakes. We try to identify our prejudices. We recognize there are seeds and weeds in both gardens. There are definitely seeds and weeds in both. What do we do in somebody else's garden? So we start with the basic attitude of dialogue, assuming we can do that. And normally we can. There might be some circumstances where it's difficult. If you walk into a situation of war or terrible violence, then but we still need dialogue to understand what the situation is. We have to distinguish our garden from that of the other. If I use an example, for example, when I grew up in Northwest Ohio, we had tomato fields. And we had these vines that would grow in, we'd have these big fields of 50, 60 acres of tomatoes that would be harvested. Huh? And in that we had these vines and they had these purple flowers on them. Huh? And they get tangled up into the tomato plants. And if you saw them growing along the edge of the field, you'd pull them out immediately, or else they could take over the whole field and you'd get 40% of your harvest. When I went to Papua New Guinea, I saw a plant that looked like that. I'm sure it wasn't that because I was in the tropics. But I said, oh, that looks like a weed. And they said, no, Father, that's not a weed. You take that leaf, and that's a leaf that we put on sores, and it's like a poultice. It helps us to pull out the poison from the sore. It helps us to prevent getting tropical ulcers. And those of you that live in the tropics, you know what tropical ulcers can do. Huh? So in other words, what may appear or be a weed in our garden may be a good seed in someone else's. This takes discernment, but it means we need to take some time before we jump to conclusions. Huh? So we do this, it's natural. Sometimes we also have to take a prophetic stance as an outsider. I don't have time to talk about all these things when I teach. I have more time to go into details. The care that the Papua New Guineans had for their elderly and their weak was something that struck me. And I said, wow, they do that better than they do in my own home sometimes. Huh? Where we put away people in homes and don't see them again. However, when they talked about sorcery, they said, Father, this is a weed for us. They identified that weed. And they said, Father, can you help us to overcome that weed? It's not an easy one. Yeah. Domestic violence. There's domestic violence, I think, in every place of the world. The difference in Papua New Guinea is that it's not hidden behind closed doors. you see it. In the US, we hide it, usually. Papua New Guinea, it's public. When I saw domestic violence, I stopped, I walked over, and I tried to walk between. In other words, and then later on, I brought up to the parish council. I said, this is your garden. What do we do about this? It's a very difficult issue, as we know. I also got very involved in male initiation rituals. And the male initiation rituals had both good seed, teaching people how to be good adults, how to be respectful of elders, how to carry on their tradition in a good way, but there also were weeds in their traditional rites. In the past, sometimes people died during initiation because of the severity of the physical test. How do we sort that out? How do we do this? Intercultural and intergenerational relationships. We need people in those gardens to help us to discern this. In Papua New Guinea, Ambrose and Ida. Ambrose was the principal of the Catholic grade school. Him and his wife, Ida, they lived across the grass airstrip. And often I would talk to him about situations, and he would talk with me also. And I ended up developing, a network of folks that I could talk with about how do we sort this out. What happens in our own garden? Our own garden gets challenged, changed. Certainly my life has been changed dramatically from my few years, my 6 years in Papua New Guinea, but my years in living in multicultural communities here in Chicago, especially not just with the Vietnamese. Now, of course, our community is very diverse. This year we have several African Americans, we have 6 guys from Africa, we have Vietnamese born, we have Indonesian born, we have a whole variety here. It's in that way, from all over, different places, Guatemala, Mexico. Yeah. Vincent Donovan, he's a Puritan missionary, worked in East Africa amongst the Maasai people. And when he did his work there, he stepped out of the traditional ways of doing mission. He accompanied the Maasai, who were nomads, who herded cattle. And he talks about how he rediscovered his Christianity by walking with the people. A year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to go to Mongolia. In Mongolia, where Christianity is just 27 years old after being freed from communism. I felt like I was rediscovering Christianity. I felt like I stepped back into Acts of the Apostles, entering that community of first-generation Christians in the country of Mongolia. How we can be changed and challenged. I can talk about my experience with my nieces and nephews. I have 34 nieces and nephews. So even within my own family, how I am enriched and challenged by them. And certainly within our own religious congregations. Okay. In conclusion, taking this from Jerry Arbuckle, who is an anthropologist and also a religious himself. You may be familiar with a lot of his other writing he does in terms of religious life. Some of it's quite challenging material that he's writing. He describes 3 stages in interaction with people of different cultures and generations. And again, cultures in a broad sense. Okay. We start out by that fascination with difference. This is the honeymoon stage. Oh, isn't this nice? Look at that difference. Oh, I love this. I love this difference. However, when the honeymoon stage goes off, I don't like the difference. Why do people do this? Often we project our own discomfort on others, especially in language school, but even later, when we're starting to have problems in our parish work, it's easy to project our discomfort on others. So what happens is, Jerry says that often what we do is we go back to step 1, and we say, oh, let's have a nice meal together and just sort of enjoy the upper 15% of an iceberg, just enjoy the superficial part, the surface level. We said the challenge is not to take a step back, but to take a step forward where we really mutually engage our difference. And we begin to really understand it. We go below the water level on the iceberg. This takes courage. It's risky. Yeah. But that's what interculturality is. Going beyond the difference. And we name the difference. We don't deny it. We don't say everybody's the same. No. Certainly we're all children of God, but we have our differences. So how do we engage that difference? beyond tolerance, the mutual intercultural living. Okay, we come to our Q&A time here, and I'm trying to see the, let's see here. I'm looking for the chat. I not see the chat. I don't know if, should we just go, I think we can go to the screen. I'll take down the PowerPoint and we can see each other. Can we do that?
We can do that.
Okay. All right, then we can see each other this way. Okay. So let's, oh, now I see the chat down there now. Okay. Okay, so all I see there now is Doom's instructions about writing down your questions. So, but does anybody have any questions in that? And again, Steve and I will share with you in this way. So any comments or reflections on this presentation this afternoon, or you might have a reflection from this morning too.
Let me begin with one question.
Okay.
Living in a cultural community, sometimes we learn to tolerate one another, but you say that there's an imminent dangers if we keep tolerating with one another. How do a person move beyond toleration into acceptance of the differences of one another, even though you might not like that difference?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the big challenge you're naming now. So, I mean, we want to start with tolerance. So you agree, okay, you're going to have some order in the parish. Who takes which mass? Who presides where? You need to get some order there, huh? But hopefully to go beyond just that externals and to go to really adaptation and acceptance of others. And I think that is why we're talking spirituality. That means where we really recognize God's grace working in the other, and they are God's creation, and this is their earthen vessel. And how can I really begin to understand this earthen vessel, even though it looks different than mine, and to see it as a gift, huh? So again, I think it calls for, and Steve, I'll let you chime in here. I don't see you on the screen here yet, but I think you're there someplace. You know, that if we really have to, in our minds and hearts, we have to say we really want to understand the other, and being able to name our differences and trying to find a way to appreciate and be enriched by the other. And this is the real challenge of the interculturality. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I mean, to me, I mean, part of it's intellectual too, is that when people come, you want to learn more about where they come from, what's the situation, and often this can be done through simple sharing, people sharing stories about their family. I'm interested. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your family. You know what I mean? Sometimes it doesn't require a lot of work, but how can we seriously sit down and say, I'd like to hear your story? Now we know in a pastoral setting, this is very important. Be able to tell people, I want to hear your story. But how often do we do this? I mean, I shouldn't say it that way. I think that's an opportunity for us to do it as SVDs as well with one another. And I really do. I want to hear your story, Doom. I want to hear the story of all of you. Yeah. Yeah. And Steve, I don't know.
Sure. I think one way I think is quite powerful, and I experienced this years ago in the Philippines, but also time since, is real prayer together. I don't mean just meeting for morning prayers and reciting the Psalms, but I mean what happens at the prayers of the faithful, or the prayers at the end of the liturgy. Do we share what's going on in our lives, what's going on in our ministry? Maybe some struggles or some of the things that we're concerned about in the world or in our home country or something like that. We talk a lot about Bible sharing. Again, it's a practice that we can bring, if we're intentional about it, so much personal and cultural stuff, and let people know who we are. A lot of times we don't let people know who we are, and because of that, they can't really, they just see the tip of the iceberg and not what's down below. So I think that kind of thing, or things that, I mean, we do, but so often, just meeting regularly for meals together. Now, you're spread out in the province, that's hard, but in parish situations, or communities like Riverside and things like that, what do we talk about? Do we only talk about, how the Bears are doing, or the Packers are doing, or Barcelona, or whatever, or do we make effort to really talk about important stuff and get away from the superficial? I think we have to find practices that we intentionally engage in, so we can break down the barriers that sometimes tolerance simply set up. And so that's one way of doing it. There's no silver bullet. There's no special way of doing it. But I think if we're intentional about it, if we're passionate about it, and if we can be honest, and particularly, I really think in the area of prayer and shared faith and shared biblical reflection, I think we can really break down some boundaries, and it can make a big difference in our lives.
And thank you, Steve. I think the other thing I just add to what you're doing is basically doing basic stuff we do, but to be intentional about really reaching, understanding the other. It's not about scheduling a whole bunch of new events, but how do we do what we do, and how do we do that intentionally? And I'm aware of this now. I walk into the social. We can't do it now under COVID, but in the past, when we'd have our social evenings on Thursday night, and when I'd go in there, I'd say, "No, okay, don't, Roger, just don't talk to the white folks. Just move around." In some ways, I'm not against talking to white folks, but in other words, sometimes you just got to be intentional about we got to step out. Yeah. Okay. I see that there's a question here from Peter Zai. We often say that Jesus' mission was countercultural. As missionaries, are we supposed to be countercultural to help people living in a specific culture to live according to God's moral standard, which is objective, regardless of what culture people live in? Peter, I would say yes, we are to be countercultural as Jesus was. Tomorrow, the session that we have in the morning is the intercultural journey of Jesus. And then it's going to be followed in the afternoon by the intercultural journey of the early church. And I think that will point to how was Jesus intercultural, and how did he bring what he called, at least in the synoptic gospels, the reign of God? How did he live that? What does that mean in different cultures? I think tomorrow we'll be able to focus a little more on that. Okay.
I think too, I think it's important that we also are a bit tolerant in some of these areas. I think Pope Francis, it's very controversial, but what he talks about in Amoris Laetitia, he talks about a gradual approach, and don't just jump in and condemn, in the name of the gospel or in the name of God, because sometimes people are really trying to do things, and where they're trying, even though objectively they may be sinful or not moral, what Pope Francis says is grace is operative there. So we can't be too quick to judge people, especially when it's in terms of of other cultures. So we have to, Roger talked about how we have to learn to live with ambiguity. And I think that's a real art. And I think that's the whole thing of, we talk about prophetic dialogue. There's this constant kind of discernment that we have to do. We can't compromise, but on the other hand, I think we can recognize that even in some of the most difficult situations, that grace, there are glimmers of grace even there.
If someone would like to ask a question, they can unmute themselves as well. If you don't feel like typing in your question out, you can unmute yourself and ask the question as well.
I have a question, Bricio.
Brigio, yeah.
In a pluricultural community, mobility is sometimes a reality. And from one time to the other, members keep changing. But how to minimize sometimes the existence of subcultures that go with some groups that come and go. When I refer to subcultures, the traditions and the idiomatic expressions and the, I mean to say, the nationalities that come with them, and of course that show, and that affects community living. How to minimize the negativity of it sometimes. I don't know if you get my question,
Yeah.
Roger?
Yeah, I mean, I could say, let's just say, in my context, okay, I'm living in a theology community. This year has been different because of COVID-19. But normally we have almost a 50% change every year in our community, 50% change. With people going out in for cross-cultural training, getting ordained, coming from the novitiate, people changing and things like that. So I'm used to every year having almost 50% change. This year is different because of COVID-19 and we didn't have the same amount of change. But what we do is at the beginning, we have a way, and I know that this is a formation community that, and you're not talking about that, but what we try to do is just try to, at the beginning, have everybody sort of share a bit of who they are, where they come from, what their context, what kind of ministry they're coming from. In other words, it means that we have to sort of very quickly try to get to know each other, at least on the surface level. Because if you don't know each other on the surface level, then you can't go much beyond that at first, huh? But I think it's a big challenge if there's a big turnover all the time, and it gets to be tiring, huh? I think sometimes we can say, oh, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired. I mean, I've been at this for so long, And I mean, I must admit that but I'm used to it here in my situation that there's a constant turnover in the community I live in. I live in a much bigger community. It's a formation community, but every year I'm joining a different small community, different guys, different experiences. They all have their accents. They all have their way of joking. They have their way of understanding who the SPDs are. But I think the challenge is, how do we try to get to know each other, engage each other, at least on that level? And then, as Steve was saying before, Bible sharing can be a wonderful way. You don't need to know well. If when people share from the scriptures, and they are sharing from their own cultural context, even though they may not identify it as such, and they are. How can we listen to how God's word is coming to them? I don't know. Steve, I don't know if you have something else to say there in that regards.
The only thing I would say, I'm not quite sure I understood Bricio's question, but building on what you're saying, and I hope this does answer your question, Bricio, somehow. But
Okay.
It's just a phrase. It's just a phrase that Tony Gittins uses a lot in his book on interculturality, which Roger and I would really recommend that book. It's just it's a great book with lots of just helpful ideas and stuff. But he uses he uses a term of the Chinese American Eric Law that is it's radical welcome. Now, it's a term, but it's one of these great terms that I think if we can practice radical welcome in our communities. Now, what that means concretely, the context has to dictate that. But just to think about that term and let it kind of work through you, to radically welcome people, not just tolerate or not just say, you can come in, but you gotta conform to the way we do things, but we really welcome you in all your individuality and all your richness and all the diversity that you bring. So it's a nice phrase, I think, which might be helpful.
Yeah, okay. Because once I was a victim, well, Filipinos, we eat rice 3 times a day or more times. And whenever I, yes, whenever I eat rice, somebody will say, oh, you don't exist. Oh, you cannot exist. You cannot survive without eating rice. Well, sometimes it's a joke, but sometimes you take it so seriously because they always recriminate you for that. It's not really pleasant to be hearing that from all sides, from everybody. But anyway, that is my question. You're right. I take it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the practical thing is we learn how to eat different foods and that sort of thing.
Mario has a question. Mario, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Mario, are you there?
You need to unmute yourself, Mario. Unmute yourself, Mario. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're okay now. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you. Just a question to awake. Some conference are sleeping, and I am not sure that tolerance is enough. But because we have several examples about the Black Lives Matters in our society, in this great nation, I don't think tolerance is working. It is a problem that needs another approach. It coming from ages. And that happened also with other ethnicity in our communities even. I think we have to do more positive and do something better. Like in this day, preaching about the World Mission Sunday was one way to talk about the human family, the humankind, or also exploring the apostolic letter of the Pope Francis about calling Fratelli Tutti, also another way. I think our witnesses is very important for our communities, talking about our own experience in other cultures and how to accept and love those who are different of our own culture. There is a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I certainly agree with you, Mario. We got to go beyond mere tolerance. But again, we have to do much more than that. I mean, I'm involved now in some anti-racism projects, and we're dealing with some of these questions. How do you get this? How do we move beyond this prejudice and things like that and see each other in that way? So I mean, it's a big job, but I think, again, like you said, we as SVDs, as religious, we are to be prophetic in this way. Not prophetic in the sense that we pat ourselves in the back. No, prophetic in that this is who God calls us to be. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I see that, you're watching that film.
Yeah, Jim Nibbler has a comment here.
Yeah.
Within a culture, young adults might be more in the world of chaos, whereas the older or elderly is in a more of a world of order within the same cultures. Value of the young may be rejected by elderly and vice versa. Monoculture, I forgot, by themselves is fluid within the border of what the culture accepts. But this can also flow exactly in the opposite way. Today in the church, many progressive are young among the older faithful, and the traditional movement among younger Catholics It would seem chaos is a constant in a highly politicized world. Many aim for a safe space because of all the demands one encounters. So can you give some comment on that?
I mean, I think it's very true what you're saying there, Jim. I mean, I think in terms of between generations, I mean, I see that, I mean, you all see this very clearly when you talk about, you know, people, migrant communities coming to the U.S. The difference between those parents who came, those who were young when they came, those who were born in this country, the challenges that are there between the different generations as they look for security. Because again, meaning, identity, and order. We want to have some sort of meaning, identity, and order in life. And where do we find that? And sometimes it's easier to go to a black-white world in which there, you know, you get rid of the ambiguity and you try to go back or go somewhere, maybe whatever, go somewhere to try to find that order in the midst of that chaos, looking for what you say, a safe space, because, you know, they find it so difficult to engage the difference. Let's go back to, you know, what I know, what I value in that regards. You raise a number of important points there, Jim, and probably it's more of a comment than questions, because I think you're putting your finger on the challenges that are there in terms of that. I don't know if Steve, you want to say something, or Jim, maybe you want to highlight something in there that you're still muted there, Jim. I don't know if you want to highlight something more from what you said.
I just, it was a comment with the idea that within culture, the individual personality and the life experience can drive a person in one direction or another, seeking both wanting to share their difference, as well as getting to a point where I'm so tired of trying to be understood, I'd rather withdraw and seek out people that already share my values, so that it seems like there's movement even within what you would call, we all agree on all the rules culture. There are times where even within that culture, there's tension because of age difference, experience, expectation, money, or whatever. And so when we add on to this, the idea of, you know, what in the past they called crossing over and now intercultural living, it adds a new level of not only uncomfortableness within my own culture and what's expected of me or where I see the culture going, its good seeds and the weeds. And then there is this overwhelming kind of encounter with the other who's going through similar kinds of understanding as well. So it's just a comment.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's,
I think one thing that somewhat I'm finding an echo here.
Not too sure. If you finish your question already, please mute your microphone. I invite those who are not speaking to mute your microphone.
Okay, good. Okay. So I think this might be helpful, Jim. At least it's somewhat connected. Is that, you know, in a way, and in a way, interculturality is not exactly the best word in a way, because it's not just about culture. It's about generations. It's about gender. It's about sexual orientation. I mean, it's about any kind of diversity there is, and so it's you know, it's a lot of things that are bumping into one another, you know, that demands this kind of this kind of dialogue. So I think you put your finger on something that's really important. The other thing is, this is anticipating something I'm going to say on Friday, but I don't think there's anything wrong with occasionally getting with people or situations where you feel entirely comfortable and you don't feel like you're swimming upstream. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, I don't think that's the way we should live every day, you know, in an intercultural community. But I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, getting together with, you know, people from our own nationality or our own culture or something like that. I'm going to be talking about, I have these 12 rules that I'm going to be talking about on Friday. And my last rule is, and I hate to, jump the gun here, but it's what's called Schroeder's rule. It's Bob Schroeder at CTU knows a lot about culture and stuff like that. And Schroeder's rule, it's a kind of tongue-in-cheek rule, but it's like every day you have the right to say something bad about the situation you're in. You know, now you don't say it to the other people. You might say it to a confidant. You might say it to yourself, but sometimes you just got to let off steam, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we're talking about an intentional kind of living where, you know, gradually we get into it and we love it and we're changed. But as we're working at it, you know, I think we have to have sometimes some vacation from it.
Sony, you have a question? I ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question, Sony.
Roger, Stephen, you both were speaking about the cultural divide as well as tolerance. Now, one of the problems, at least I think many of us face, is the emergence of a new culture that is happening now. The social media culture. Does it have any kind of ethnicity at all for this social media culture? Because what happens here in the United States, more or less, is the same thing, either in a way absorbed or imitated or followed in other parts of the place. So also the same way, because there are so-called new apps that come up every day, probably inviting people. So there is a kind of a convergence of all the cultures, it looks like, taking place in this social media. And how do we respond to that?
Yeah, as you know, this is a complex area and it's it's changing every day as we talk now, and especially now in the coronavirus, you know, it's taking on new dynamics, There's new things happening in that way. I think that if I would consider social media under the umbrella of globalization, I think that there's both positive and negatives under social media as well. So I think on a positive side, people can be connected with each other. We can do this retreat now. I can connect with people in the Philippines. Social media can build relationships, and some of these relationships go way beyond superficial. They can, you know, that good links between people and the people that are in need in different parts of the world. We can be aware of it. I mean, I think it can build closer bonds because of those connections. I think the negative side is that it can also, people can get lost. They can lose their identity. Who am I in this midst? Am I a part of some general sort of cultural dynamic? And who am I really? When I get sick, who do I really, where do I go to when I'm in crisis? Where do I go for when I need identity? And I'm not sure, again, you're probably a better expert to talk about social media than I am, you know? I'm going to be doing a conference in December, and we have one of our speakers. We've asked Peter Clay-Renard, you know, he was Ghanaian, we've asked him to speak on this whole thing of social media and interculturality. And I'll be very interested to hear what he has to say about that. But I think it's, I mean, in terms of globalization, the social scientists, they invent, part of the term that they use, interculturality, they say interculturality can overcome, we hope it can overcome some of the negative things of globalization, where local cultures, local economies are being swamped. How can we have real respect of all peoples, all indigenous peoples, all peoples who are not rich? You know, how do we do that? So I think that's the challenge. On the other hand, like I said, it can also create human bond over a broader perspective. I don't know if you have further thoughts on that yourself, Sonny. You work in social media all the time,
No, Roger, I would love to get get some information after you have attended that program. I would love to hear that.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah, I can forward that talk to you. It's
Steven, do you want to respond to that?
Steve, you want to respond?
Well, I'm the most unsocial media person in the world, I think. I'm not very good at it, and I just don't have a lot of time for it myself personally.
Brother Steve, you have a question, Brother Steve? Brother Steve Party, unmute yourself. Yes.
I'm learning here.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you, Steve. Go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, no, well, a couple of things, a question and then a comment, if I can, Roger. All of your books that you mentioned there are kind of intriguing. Are they available on Kindle or PDF, or maybe at the end of this, you could write out a list of them and direction of how to get them? Especially if they're on Kindle, which is, I have them. Oh, yeah, but are they on Kindle or whatever?
No.
Yeah, well, anyway, if it's possible, I don't know. The other comment is, I think from my little observations, it's interesting that there's also a positive side to this, meaning that sometimes a foreigner, an outsider, can go where a national cannot go. And I've experienced that myself, but I'm thinking now, especially in this year, where they're celebrating the anniversary of the Greenville, or the beginning of Bay St. Louis. I'm sorry that wasn't pushed more, but that was accomplished only by foreigners.
Yeah.
An American could not have gone down to the South to do that, but a stupid German could. And so it has a positive aspect too. So any comments?
Yeah, certainly. In terms of the books, okay, you're gonna have to mute yourself.
So I turn that off?
Yeah, okay, now that's, you must have two computers in the same room or something like that. Anyways, most books are, many books are now on Kindle also. So some of those, later on, John Kirby, you can remind me, and I can send a list of those books in that way, and just to let you know. But certainly nowadays, most books are on Kindle. I don't know about the ones of Editorial Verbo Divino, but those would be in Spanish, of course. But other books by Tony Gittins and some of these other, the Engaging Our Diversity, these books are by Kindle, so you can get them that way. And we can later on send you that list and that, or other things too that are there. In terms of your question, yeah, it's true that we can, as outsiders, I said, we start out being dialogical when we come into a context to learn it, but at the same time, we can also be prophetic. And your example of what happened with our German missionaries in the US is a perfect example. During that time of the terrible KKK and the racism and everything like that, the SVDs were able to do it. And there were several communities that tried it before us. There were several, I think 3 other communities tried to do this before we did, and were not able to do it yet at that point. But with the SVDs, the Germans were saying, why can't African Americans be ordained? This is happening in Africa, Asia, and every place else in the world. Why isn't it happening here? And the Germans were able to look beyond the blind racism of within the US and to look beyond that. That's a major, I think it's one of the most significant contributions the SVDs have made in North America. I don't mean we can sit back on our laurels. We got to continue to stress those boundaries, to reach out to those in that way. But I agree that, and like for me with domestic violence in Papua New Guinea or in other situations, and as an outsider, we can, but I think we always have to always be listening to what else is going on, the different voices.
We have about a few more minutes for the Q&A. I think Peter Zai have one question that he raised up on our chat. He say, how about the movement of cancel culture happening in this country?
Steve, you want to respond to that? You have to unmute yourself, Steve.
I think there is, this polarization that is happening in the country. This lack of, I mean, if we're back to tolerance, I mean, even if we just had tolerance there, it would be better than, just knocking someone out for saying the wrong thing or wearing the wrong clothes or something like that. So I think we, certainly religious, but Christians in general, I mean, we have to be people of some kind of dialogue and some kind of understanding, because it is just it's awful. It really is. And I think we have to be, I think we have to be really prophetic in this regard, that we don't cancel people out. We don't throw them away. We don't discount them simply because of this. And I mean, this is not easy. There are certainly some people that I would love to cancel, some politicians and things like that, but we still have to somehow be, be open to dialogue and argue with and stuff like that. I don't think we can close ourselves, the way this happens. Again, somebody mentioned Fratelli Tutti. You read that and it's clear this is what Francis is trying to get at.
Thank you very much. Right now, it is already 4 o'clock. I have to ask Roger, do you have like question for reflection for us or anything like that at all? So that hopefully when they take a little break, 15 minutes, then they can share, or do you have any, or should you recommend private meditation?
Well, I don't have any prepared questions for this session. I would say, are people going to get together for their own shared time now? They're going to do that in a little bit?
If you have some question for them, then they can, I can put them in the different groups for sharing. If not, then we can also invite them to meditate on what you have already presented, just to how is it that our community living, especially intercultural type of living, can help us. What is it that we can do to improve our life, or beginning that conversation from a personal level. We have already rooted ourselves early in the morning with our own story of sharing with that already. Those 2 questions that you have, and different groups have done sharing as well. So if you have any, don't have anything, then maybe we can invite them to have a little break, then private meditation from now until on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the 2 points I would think of is, if you could think yourself of a intercultural encounter you had, and just to reflect on it in terms of how, for yourselves now, what would you see as both the challenges and the opportunities in that own? And if you could think of something concrete, I don't think you have to come together as groups if you don't, that you don't need to do that. But again, make this concrete. And some of you you're already doing it with your comments. You're thinking of concrete situations. In other words, I don't want us to float with our heads in the sky and just think about this. But can you think of a particular incident or a particular encounter? I'm sure you can. I know you can. Of a particular encounter, maybe just to reflect on that from the light of what we're talking about here in that way. So maybe just for your own personal reflection, to think of a personal encounter, and no matter how it turned out at the end, but maybe just to use that as an opportunity, sort of a case study or a particular example to sort of reflect upon around these issues of interculturality. Does that sound okay, Doom?
Yes, that sounds pretty good.
Okay.
So I would like to take this moment to give thanks to Roger and Stephen for answering all the different challenging questions that you have been given us, as well at the same time, Roger, for sharing all your thoughts on intercultural living and all the definitions so that we are in the same framework and also the same frame of mind so that we can share and speak with one another in a very dialogical way and also trying to understanding one another. So thank you very much for your sharing today. I just want to take this moment to kind of share with you the schedule for tomorrow because many of you already are at your place already, at your home already. But it's good that I give you already the schedule tomorrow so that you may have a good ideas what it be like. Today, we do not have group sharing. For those who haven't had Eucharist yet, which they can do so at 4:30. And those who have like social is at 5 and supper is at 6. Now for tomorrow's schedule, now we will begin the session here at 9 a.m. with Roger on our third session. And the third session for tomorrow will be the intercultural journey of Jesus. Then we will take a break at 10:30. At 11 o'clock, we will be have a group sharing and we take a break. Please note that tomorrow we will be meeting at 2 p.m. for the second session, for the fourth session. Please let me repeat that again. We will meet at 2 p.m. at the for the fourth session, and we follow by Q&A. We take a break, question, then the Eucharist, social, and supper. So I just want to share with you just the schedule for tomorrow, just in case that we do not meet together again as a whole group, but it would be nice that everybody's informed, everybody's updated with the schedule. So I would like to take this moment to give thanks to everyone for being here today. I hope that in this moment of your private meditation and reflection, you are able to gain more personal experience and look at the reality of your life, how you have encountered very particular situation that Father Roger Schroeder was inviting us to reflect into our own life. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Good.
Anyone would like any share or thoughts or anything like that for tomorrow? Feel free to speak now. Right now, we pretty much finished with all the presentation already. Any comments or anything that we might improve to help us for tomorrow? If not, then we are ready to say goodbye to one another. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
So Roger, is it okay already what we did today, or you would like some change that we can make for tomorrow?
I think it's fine. I'll talk together with Steve in a little bit too. He's got something else he's doing right now, but I'll try to catch him later and stuff like that. But I guess the one question I'd have is, I mean, tomorrow will be a bit earlier in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So 2 o'clock your time. So whether we'd want to have the group sharing maybe tomorrow afternoon, even though we didn't do it today, I think that might be something to consider. In some ways, it's sort of dependent. I sort of count on you to have a sense of the group too, in terms of what people would want. So, you know, Steve and I are here to serve your community. And, you know, I don't quite know, you know, what this means for the guys. I mean, I know in my experience in the past, annual retreats is also time for relaxing and just being with people, stuff like that. So I want to respect.
Yeah, if you don't have any question or for us to reflect on, sometimes we just send them to private meditation.
Okay.
However they would like to do it. It does, if you would like for us to share some of those questions.
Okay.
Like today, the story, trying to help us to share our life story.
Yeah.
thing that impacted. It seemed like people were, I found that people were sharing their life story. It kind of helped build that relationship in the background a little bit. So it's what's good.
Good. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. I'll take a look at the PowerPoints for tomorrow. I have to remember whether I've actually put questions there. If not, I can always add others.
Yeah,
And we can talk to each other too in terms of how we proceed. Yeah.
sure. If we need to do a group sharing, that will be okay. If not, then we can just have a meditation.
Sounds good.
Question.
Sounds good, Dylan. Yeah.
That would be good. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
Have a good day.
All right.
Have a good day, Jesus.
Hey, Jesus.
Ovo and Benny, take good care, okay? Richard, take good care. I will end the session now, okay?
Thank you.